Welcome back to the Groundless Ground podcast, the leading edge of integrative mental health. I'm your host, Lisa Dale Miller. You can subscribe to, download, and review the Groundless Ground on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn, and of course, find out more at groundlessground.com. I'm ready to go. How about you? My dialogue with Cuong Lu, Buddhist teacher and prison chaplain in the Netherlands, was by far the most moving experience of my podcasting life. Cuong's wisdom and limitless compassion brought me to tears several times during our time together. Cuong was born in 1968 in Vietnam and grew up in the midst of war, only knowing fighting, until his mother moved them to the Netherlands when he was 12, and he experienced friendliness for the first time. Cuong spent many years as a monk with Thich Nhat Hanh, and then became a lay Buddhist teacher in 2009. His is a deeply relational Dharma, characterized by complete embodiment of interbeing, the empty inseparability of all beings. Cuong's remarkable new book, The Buddha in Jail, Restoring Lives, Finding Hope and Freedom, recounts his unique application of the Buddhist teachings for prisoners who, he asserts, are often able to understand the Dharma more quickly than those whose lives have been easier. Cuong is on book tour July 22nd through August 2nd in New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Madison, and several venues here in the San Francisco Bay Area. You can find his schedule in the show notes for this episode, and I urge any of you who can to attend and meet this remarkable man. Cuong Lu, it is a deep honor to have you on the Groundless Ground podcast.
Thank you, Lisa.
I wanted to just start with a little bit of history. You were born in Vietnam, right?
Yes, I was born during the war, 1968, the Vietnam War.
I remember I was 10, living in America during that time. The experience here was very awful. I don't know if you want to say anything about that time.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't notice that I was born in a war because I didn't know peace. I was born and I saw people fighting, killing, and hurting each other. And I didn't notice that I was born in a war.
Yes.
Until I came to Holland and I kept fighting to survive like we used to do. I tell in the group one time and was ready to fight with someone, and he said, Cuong, we are friends, we don't fight. I was 12 years old.
12?
Yes,
You
yes.
had no idea what it was like to live without fighting.
So when he said like that, and I almost cried because for the first time I understood about friendship, people who live together and they don't fight or they don't hurt each other. I don't know how to express that feeling at that moment of enlightenment. And then from that moment, I understood that I was born in a war.
Yes.
Yes. And I also saw only the fighting outside between me and the society, but also the fighting inside of me.
Yes, of course. This is such a profoundly clear expression of the nature of childhood trauma when it's from day one.
The same thing I noticed when I saw the prisoners later at the chaplain. It's so nice to start with that right away because when I saw them, you can say anything about them, what they have done and hurt so many people, but they didn't notice what they have done to other people and they have done to themselves. They didn't notice that.
So it's as though the prisoners were opaque to the truth of their own life.
Yes. At that time when I saw them, I have found peace already. That's a long trip to search for inner peace. It had taken me almost 20 years to be able to discover what it is, inner peace. No fighting inside of me, no discrimination inside of me. And when I saw the prisoners as someone who had found his inner peace, and they noticed that. They saw me and they could feel that. Can you understand that? I look at them and they knew that. They knew this man don't judge me. And then for the first time in their life, for the very first time, they experienced something like that in their life.
Do you think that you had that capacity to see this truth about the prisoners because you had, for the first 12 years of your life, only known a life of violence?
Yes, I have only known a lot of violence outside and also inside. And I can see that in them too. I was there with them as a peaceful man. It means I don't judge you and I believe in you. That you also can find peacefulness in yourself, like me. I came from the war also and I found peace. And you have the same capacity. Almost every prisoner could understand that. That's my experience. It's not my idea. It's unbelievable. You come in and you look at them and you don't say, I love you, I believe you, I trust you. You don't say anything. I just come in and you see a human being. I understood also that they are suffering for the first time, like me. When my friend said, Cuong, we are friends, we don't fight. And for the first time, I understood the war within me.
I have an entire 3 pages of quotes from your book. There's so many truths in this book that could only be communicated by someone who had the life experience that you've had. There's so many people out there who may be teaching meditation in prison or yoga in prison, but this is a testament to connection with basic humanness, unlike
Yes.
anything I've ever read before. I just want to read a couple of things that you wrote. You write, I've been a Dharma teacher for 20 years, and I've observed that prisoners, war veterans, refugees, and others who have been through extreme difficulties are often able to understand the Dharma more quickly than those whose lives have been easier.
Yes, that's true. Very often, when we talk about Buddhism, the Buddha said that dukkha satya. He meant suffering is a noble truth.
Yes.
And very often we misunderstand him. We believe that he said that suffering is a problem, need to be resolved. And when you are able to get in touch with suffering in a deep way, you understand deeply happiness.
Yes.
When you share happiness in a deep way, you can understand the nature, the suffering. And the prisoner, he has a lot of suffering, and no one helped them to get in touch with their suffering. And that's why they are unable to find peace inside of them. And that's the reason why they repeat again and again their mistakes. And when you are able to show to them just one moment, 1 second, the experience of peace, they understand the suffering and I understand the Dharma in the deepest way.
Sukha is the Pali word for joy that is just there in one's beingness. And then Satya is the Pali word for truth.
Yes.
Sukha Satya means happiness is the truth.
I see people misunderstand the Buddha. So I try to find a way to explain what he meant. And I found it. It was in 2003. And suddenly I understood I can teach the first noble truth as happiness.
You were a monk in France under the guidance of Thich Nhat Hanh for quite some time. So during 2003, I think you were still a monk. So can you tell me a little bit about the experience you had in 2003?
I was still a monk, and the reason why I wanted to be a monk is I wanted to find a way not to help myself, but to help people to be free from the war, from the suffering, especially from war inside. And so I practiced under the guidance of my teacher, but I was also looking for a way to express the wisdom of my teacher and of the Buddha. I look day and night, and I want to have a simple, a clear way to help people to understand the teaching of the Buddha. And in 2003, suddenly I saw I can share the wisdom of the Buddha by sharing that the first noble truth is happiness. And first, people didn't understand me. Who are you to say things that the Buddha didn't say? The Buddha lived in a very different environment and had to say different things in order to give the guidance to people of his time. And I believe if the Buddha lived in our time, he would say the same thing. Happiness is first noble truth. Because I don't see any separation between suffering and happiness. When you get in touch with happiness, you gotta get in touch with suffering. And when we are able to touch suffering deeply, you are touching happiness. This book is published in 2018. So it was a very long path for me to show that this is the Dharma.
There's a couple of quotes again that I want to just read from the book that I think will allow people to understand what ostensibly to many people right now may sound contradictory, but I understand that it is not contradictory.
Yes, thank you, Lisa.
I would read a couple examples from the book where you describe these experiences from the point of view of how you understand the way prisoners received and actually enacted the Dharma. You refer to prisoners in the book as Buddhas. You wrote, as Buddhas, prisoners have deep insights we can rely on. Prisoners have the power and wisdom to resolve difficult situations. Most guidance given in prison assumes the prisoners need to learn from the supervisors. I think it's the other way around. I've learned a lot from prisoners. They've been through hell, and I have faith in their wisdom. Recognizing this changes the way I listen to them. So as a chaplain in the prison, I think it sounds as though you saw your role as more than just giving them spiritual comfort. In some ways, it sounds as though you really wanted to point out the nature of reality and have them awaken, even in the midst of prison life.
Yes, every practitioner has the deepest wish to get enlightened. And me too. I had the wish that I can become enlightened with deep insight. And I have found enlightenment, but not inside of me, in you, Lisa. And when I worked in the prison, I saw that in the prisoner. I really did see the prisoner as the Buddha. You can say it is a kind of discovery I made. And the moment I saw him as a Buddha, he had the wisdom of the Buddha. It means they are able to come back to themselves too and recognize their own sufferings. And they could see suffering as a first noble truth. And at the same time, happiness as a first noble truth. Because it's wonderful to be able to get in touch with your suffering. Because suffering as a first noble truth is exactly the same as happiness as a first noble truth.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, especially in this context, these were individuals for whom suffering was in their face all the time.
Yes.
And yet, the nature, the truth of the suffering was not visible to them in their own mind.
Suffering was not visible.
So they're in the midst of it and they are experiencing it. And if you ask them if they're suffering, they would say yes. But the roots of why they suffer, that was not known.
When you ask them, do you suffer? And they would say no.
When they would say no, they were not saying, I am enjoying my experience in prison.
When we suffer, instead of that we know we are suffering, we always experience it in a way that I'm suffering because of you. In that case, they don't really recognize their suffering. They're always looking for the cause of suffering, and the cause is in other people. Because you act like that, you do like that, that's why I suffer. And that's how they think. That's how we think too. We don't see our true suffering as a noble truth.
Exactly.
When you see suffering as a noble truth, you don't judge the suffering. You don't even say this is my own suffering. You just see suffering. And in that case, his suffering is also my suffering. And my suffering is also your suffering. And that is a noble truth. The prisoners, they didn't see that. They did blame many people for the suffering, but they didn't see suffering.
In the times that you had with the prisoners as a chaplain, it sounds as though you were introducing them to some of the meditative practices from Buddhism.
Yes.
There's one point in your book where you said, if I'd used my time to teach relaxation, that would have been helpful, but not transformative. I did my best to touch the heart of each prisoner because Buddhism is more than mindfulness alone.
Yes.
And I agree with you completely and wholeheartedly. Yes. There's one point where you mention a video that you saw of somebody teaching some kind of mindfulness or meditation in a prison. All they did was focus on non-judging, on non-judgmentality. And for you, that definitely was not the way to go.
There are two kinds of mindfulness. There's a kind of mindfulness when you're practicing being aware of things and you are still make discrimination between good and bad, between suffering and happiness, between you and me. And then in that case, your practice is in order to be more happy, to be more stable, to suffer less. What I say with the prisoners is also mindfulness practice because I've learned that mindfulness from my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. The mindfulness I've learned from my teacher is the mindfulness without that discrimination. If you really get in touch with suffering and you don't need to do anything, just by touching suffering with the inside of non-discrimination, and you, at the same time you are touching happiness. Happiness is already there in suffering. And my teacher called that the nature of interbeing. He said to me, to be is always to interbe. And as a young monk, I didn't understand that. And in the book, you can see how I apply his wisdom in teaching mindfulness. It's not a kind of practice to lead people to somewhere, but it's a practice to lead people to themselves. They are so wonderful. Be yourself. And you don't need to look for anything else.
It is the most relational kind of practice I think I've ever heard in any of the interpretations of the Buddhist teachings. The awakening is in the deep connectedness by fully, completely seeing another human being.
We all have an idea about the Buddha. And for me, when I look at you, you are really the Buddha. Since that discovery, I have a strong belief in me. I'm so happy to be able to see the Buddha. When I see you, I see the Buddha. It's for me enough. I see the wisdom in you, and your wisdom is my wisdom. Your Buddhahood is my Buddhahood. I cannot be the Buddha by myself. One of the biggest mistakes we make as a practitioner is we look the Buddhahood only in each of us. Don't do that. The Buddha is really in the other person. Buddhahood is something we need to share. We cannot give for yourself. I cannot keep the Buddha for myself. I need to share. And if I don't share, I don't see the Buddha.
As a clinician, I can see how deeply transformative this must be for someone who was raised in a situation where no one was seeing anybody as a human being.
Exactly. We saw each other as enemies. We don't have enemies. We are all friends. We always have a choice to say we are friends or we can say we are enemies. We do have a choice. Whatever the other person has done, whoever he is, we do have a choice to see him as a friend.
And I've worked with people who've spent years in prison. When they come out and they come to work with me, one of the first things I will hear is, in order for me to stay alive, I had to align with my racial group in the prison. And I may have had to do things that I didn't want to do to stay alive. So the whole culture of fighting and hatred becomes even more exaggerated in the prison situation. So I can see how you, as a chaplain, coming in with this radically alternative view that everyone you see is a Buddha, and seeing them as a Buddha will free you from suffering. I can only imagine how unbelievable that was for any of the prisoners to even go near. You have great stories in your book about how the prisoners applied recognition and teachings in their lives in the prison.
One of the prisoners, he was kind of a big brother in the prison. He had a lot of anger. When he entered my room, he always shouted and always blamed other people. He was sent to me by the director of the prison because they believe I can help him. He came to me and he received the teaching, the practice. And every time he came to me, he came with a lot of anger. And after 1 hour, he left in peacefulness. And one day he came to me and he said, Kun, have you heard about my story? What happened to me? And I said, no. I was hit by a young man from the back. I fell down and I stood up. I wanted to kill the young man who hit me. And suddenly I talked about you, about the teaching. And I stopped. I didn't kill him. I could kill him, but I didn't kill him. You save his life, you save my life, and you save the life of my family. And the most wonderful thing is that the next week I came in, he asked the same question again. Did you hear the story? And I said, yes, you told me last week. He said, no, no, no. I was hit again by another boy. And I stood up and I wanted to kill him. I could kill him and I didn't kill him. I stopped because I thought of you, of the teaching. I applied the teaching and I stopped. And to save his life, my life again, someone like that, if you don't call him the Buddha, what else can you call him? And that is just one of the stories.
Yes.
Yes.
I think this is a great example of how the Dharma is medicine. The key was recognition in the midst of suffering,
Yes.
woke up to the nature of what was actually happening after he'd been hit, and then made a choice to behave in a way that would not create more harm.
You know why he could stop? Because he believed in himself.
Right.
At that moment, he believed in his Buddhahood, capacity to stop. And why did he believe in himself? Because I believe in him. That's the case of many prisoners. One prisoner, he just came to me, Mr. Buddhist. They call me Mr. Buddhist. I want to practice with you. And I said, why do you want to come to practice with me? Because I saw the way you look at us. You look at us without judgment. I have never seen that before in my life.
As you said, I think it's deeper than without judgment, because in the mindfulness community, without judgment means you just allow things to come and go.
Yes.
And that is not what you're saying. See the truth of their beingness. You see that from the truth of your own beingness, and there is no separation.
I have discovered myself because in the past I thought, Kun, you are nobody. And yet, in that nobody, I found peace. So, non judgment, it means I don't see any separation between me and the prisoner. And also, I don't see any separation between the prisoner and the Buddha. I don't see any difference between the prisoner and the society. And that is exactly what my teachers expressed with the word interbeing. We inter are.
This is aligned somewhat when people think, for instance, terrorists are bad. That view is saying they're bad, I'm good. There is no human being that is all good or all bad.
Good and bad are on the surface.
Exactly.
I also see good things and bad things, but I also see the base of it. Especially people of our time, we always recognize things through our consciousness. And we think consciousness is everything. But consciousness is just a small part of reality. And we believe so much in our consciousness. That's why we believe so much in what we believe as good, of bad, right, of wrong. And when you apply the wisdom of the Buddha, you are able to see things deeper.
So for the clinicians that are listening, what you've just described is what we would call ego identity view. People are very fixated on the view of who they are from the point of view of identity.
In a certain way, we are exactly the same. When you ask Kun, what is your identity? Are you a man? And they say, I am a man and a woman.
Because you inter-are.
Because I'm also my mother. I'm also my sister. I'm my wife. And that is something we forget to see. I look at you, I see Lisa is a beautiful woman, but Lisa is also a beautiful man. You are also your father. What I call the truth is a product of our consciousness. We need to apply the wisdom which is in each of us to look at each other in a deeper way.
Would you be willing right now to lead listeners and an experience of this deeper way of seeing, of being?
If you look at yourself and you see your father and you see his suffering, and at the same time you see your own suffering, there is no separation between the suffering of your father and of yourself. You come back to that suffering inside of you and you say, hello, Father, I can experience your suffering. And the moment you are also touching his happiness, because there's no separation between you and your Father, and there's no separation between suffering and happiness. You can to sit down, do this small practice, and you will discover another world you have never seen before, the world of non-separation, the world of interbeing. And that is a very wonderful moment. In fact, that's what I offered to the prisoners. I could feel the emotion, the suffering, and I knew I could feel that. We don't make use our real power, real capacity to understand each other.
The most powerful thing about this way of practicing, there is no negation of pain. There's no fear about feeling whatever pain might exist. In fact, reducing suffering doesn't mean that you don't feel the pain. The pain is there, and because it's there, there's some knowledge. You might understand the nature of your pain, so you might not behave in that way again. Or it just could be that you understand that this is no different than the joy that comes from understanding the nature of your pain.
Pain and suffering is only bad when it's not visible to us.
Yes.
What is the function of suffering? It helps you to stop and say, hey, this is suffering. It's telling you about your suffering. It's telling you also about suffering of other people. And suffering is the beginning of something very beautiful. Many people see suffering as a problem, and I've been practicing trying to avoid suffering, and it was terrible because after a certain moment, I've lost my feeling, and it was not good. This is the most essential practice the prisoners need to understand suffering, and therefore they also understand happiness. And then the moment they understand suffering, they will stop causing suffering to other people and to themselves. That's what we need. You cannot be free from your suffering. You cannot let go of that, and you become a victim of your own suffering. And when a prisoner has a capacity to recognize suffering, he stop because suffering has a function to help you to stop instead of acting. Some people learn the Dharma like me a little bit more slowly because I always try to run away from suffering. I try to avoid suffering and to look for happiness.
Well, of course you would. You
Yes.
grew up in a traumatic childhood
Yes.
environment, and the level of pain that you experienced your first 12 years, so that of course you would not want to have any life experience that would
Yes.
cause pain in any way.
Yes.
That is so human, Cuong.
Of course. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So did you struggle with that in your early years as a monk when you were being introduced to this other way of seeing yourself and seeing life and seeing others?
When I saw my teacher and he was the way of interbeing instead of being, I had trouble to understand that. His teaching, he said, if you look deeply into right, you see left. You look
Yes.
deeply into this, you see that. I didn't understand that. That was my difficulty. In 2010, at that time, I left my temple, my teacher. I have decided to leave the protected environment
Oh, yes.
to look for the Dharma in another environment, not as a monk, but as a lay person. To live in that way, I can deepen my practice in order to share the Dharma in a clearer way. I left the environment and had the feeling I've lost everything. I was 16 years as a monk. Really, I didn't have anything. I didn't have any understanding of other people too. Why did you do like this? Why don't you stay as a monk? And because we like you as a monk, and we want you to be a monk. And in the midst of my suffering, and suddenly I woke up, I understood the nature of interbeing. In the midst of my suffering, I understood that deeply. There is no right or wrong. I understood after I left the monastery. It's very funny. In the monastery, I admire my teacher. I did my best in practicing, but I struggled a lot too. The moment I left it, I gave up. In the midst of my suffering, I found your true nature. None of us is good or bad. And from that moment, I know I have something to share.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a deep archetypal journey, and I relate to it.
Thank you for your understanding. I had a difficulty with that for a very long time because people don't understand. it was so difficult for me to understand my nature as a monk. You know why? Because I believe I was good. Oh, you're a monk, you must be good. That was the biggest obstacle for me. I gave a Dharma talk and I walked slowly, mindfully, and I was not free inside of me. That's why I left. Right in the midst of suffering, first time I knew I was not good and I was not bad either. And that was the first time I could understand my teacher.
And your teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, the times I was around him, there was something so transcendent about Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yes.
Not in the guru kind of way. He just emanated presence, naturalness.
His freedom. And the most beautiful thing is, Lisa, I admire him so much. And now I can see every person as Tetnakan. In every person, I see my teacher.
I think that is why what you do as a chaplain with the prisoners is so extraordinary, because
Yes.
it comes from this place of deep recognition.
I get in touch with the silence. From that moment, I could use mindfulness in a very powerful way, not as a tool to bring you something. You don't need to become anyone. You are powerful, beautiful as you are, no matter who you are. If we can look to each other in that way, we can change the society. We can change the violence in the society. And when we look at our society, we think, oh, the violence is caused by this one or by that one. But the violence is caused by our way of looking at things.
Of course.
When we change that way of looking, we can change the violence in society. And that's why I have decided to publish this book in the US as a gift to the society. And every time I see shooting at schools, I always cry. The children has done anything like me. I didn't do anything wrong. So why do you shoot at children? And then we often think, oh, he's a bad guy. What he's done is bad. It's very bad. I stand behind the law, completely agree that he needs to be put in the prison. But that's not enough. We need to help him to see what he has done and he never repeat that again. And in order to do that, we need to punish for what he has done, but we need to help him to understand himself too. The second part, we don't do enough.
But that's largely because this frame that you and I are talking about, the opposites of good and bad, the people who run the prisons, the people who put people in prison, they do have a view that somehow they are the owners of goodness and the prisoner is the owner of badness. And so the separation is inherent in putting people into prison. The key, I think, is somewhat along the lines of what you're doing. Once a person is in prison, the reason they're there, as you say, has validity.
Yes.
What they do while they're there makes the difference between allowing that person to use the causes and conditions as a way of awakening to their true nature, or using the causes and conditions as a way to continue to live a life characterized by unawareness and suffering, which is no different than the life most people outside the prison are living, because most people outside the prison have no recognition of the true nature of their suffering, nor do they have any sense of awareness of what interbeing is, what humanness actually is.
Yes. In a certain way, we are living in prisons too.
Absolutely.
The prison of our consciousness, of separation. This is a book not about prisoners, it's a book about us too. And that book is written for you because each of us is so the prisoners of our own truth. Dharma doesn't teach you the truth. The Dharma helps you to be free from the truth.
The Dharma helps you to be free from the truth?
Yes, the Dharma helps you to be free from the concepts about truth, about life, about yourself. The Dharma helps you to get in touch with the silence, the deeper level of yourself. We all have a very wonderful root or identity. I can see my identity very easily. I see you and I see my identity because you are a deeper level of myself. And we are caught in our consciousness, in our concepts about you and me, about the true, right and wrong. We don't see that. So in a certain way, we are prisoners of our prison.
So you have just slipped over into the beautiful world of Buddhist psychology.
Yes.
For anyone who is interested in Buddhist psychology, you just named the difference between manas, which is identity, view of self,
Yes.
and the nature of awareness, which is beyond any view. All
Yes.
views are concept, and conceptual way of understanding is not anything that comes close to the non-conceptual reality of recognition of the way things are and the way we actually are.
It's quite easy to be free from your views. When you look at the other person and you look with respect and you really listen to what the other has to tell to you, you're free. It's not so difficult. Body psychology, it sounds very difficult. I teach my students to accept each other in a peaceful way. The school is a place where they come and they can share the suffering and they are not ashamed of the suffering. You can see the manas as a surviving mechanism.
Yes.
It's trying to protect you. Yeah, that's where your fear come from. In a certain way, we are afraid of each other in our society. And we are, for example, afraid for prisoners. When I came in the prison the first day, I was afraid too. I was going to see someone. It's very funny. The moment I saw him, I saw myself, my fear. I could feel everything. I saw him as myself. He was free. I was free also.
I've been having these conversations over the last year or so about the nature of the way compassion is being envisioned right now.
Yes.
In clinical community, even in the Buddhist community, this thing you give to yourself feels good, it heals you. And I have a lot of trouble with this. I hope what people are hearing today is the wisdom aspect of compassion. Without this wisdom aspect is no compassion.
Right.
You truly have gone beyond the ego orientation of compassion as something you give yourself, something you give someone else. It's right view. You are recognizing the true nature, the ultimate compassion in interbeing.
Yes, sometimes people talk about self-compassion. Come means together. Self-compassion, you are contradicting yourself. Compassion is enough. Self-compassion is too much.
I am on the same page as you.
I think mindfulness is the first step. To mindfulness, they can be aware of themselves. But we need to take another step. Mindfulness cannot be without wisdom. And my teacher, he is like a bird with two wings. And one wing is mindfulness, and another wing is interbeing. Often to apply the wisdom of interbeing and be focused too much on mindfulness. And that is a problem. We believe that we can practice mindfulness without making use of the wisdom of the Buddha. The wisdom of the Buddha, I mean the wisdom of non-discrimination, of interbeing. If you don't make use of that, you don't go far enough and you get caught in your own vision, in your own truth.
What people don't understand is the three schools of Buddhism had three very different ways of envisioning compassion, three very different ways of applying compassion as a tool. For the most part, I think the orientation around compassion has been more in the Theravada view, which is very much a way of working with the mind to understand compassion, kind of love that is beyond attachment. And I think what Thich Nhat Hanh did so beautifully was he took the Mahayana view, he took away the whole bodhisattvic frame. He dropped us into the here and now experience of emptiness. This thing that I think has not filtered into the mindfulness world.
I believe we can become awakened as a society.
I agree with you.
My teacher said the next Buddha will be a community. And I see that it's going to happen. I believe the good news is coming to each of us. And we will witness something very beautiful because we are beautiful. We are all beautiful. We are all Buddhas. We will have less fighting. There won't be shooting at school anymore because we have the way. We have the way. We have each other. Don't forget each other. Every breath I still have, I work together with you. I need you to work together to this direction so that our children can be happy, go to school without any fear.
Thank you so much. I've just been touched in a very deep way because it's been very hard to be in America the last 2 years.
I understand.
This is the highest wish I have for my country.
When my book was published in the United States, I was so happy.
It is a deep honor to have had this time with you. I do think there's some way in which our being together is a way for me to deeply apologize for everything that America did to Vietnam, and also for you and I to go beyond everything America
Yes,
did to
yes,
Vietnam
yes,
and rest in the depth of our humanness and
yes.
know that suffering and happiness, there's no difference.
There is a certain thing I have been able to see, and it gives me a good feeling every time I think about that. In fact, I have discovered a home for all of us. No good, no bad, no you, no me. It means there is a home for you and me. I can see that every day. When it's very difficult in my life, I go home. When we are home, there's a lot of love, there's trust,
Yeah.
there is space for suffering. We
Mm.
can care for each other, there is compassion, and we can see each other as brothers and sisters. There's a home where we forgive each other.
Is there anything you want to share about how people can find you? Anything else you want people to know?
The book, The Buddha in Jail, is a very small book, but it's my love to offer to every human being on this planet. If you read the book and you see me in there, with that small book, we can find each other.
Well, I encourage everyone to get this
Yes.
book. That is the experience that I had. I so appreciate the time that you've given me today. The experience of interarring with you has been just very precious.
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you and to many friends.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To get in touch, please visit groundlessground.com. Let's dedicate our efforts to the healing of our planet and all its inhabitants. See you next time on the Groundless Ground.